Should Washington move into the top 4 after their big win?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Lars, we're still kind of reeling after that big victory that Washington had, 52-42 over the USC Trojans, and it did force USC to finally fire defensive coordinator Alex Grinch. So as all the everydayers out there know, I will be pouring one out for our fallen Alex Grinch out there. But I'm glad they waited until after this game to do that. But with that being said, Washington's 52-point we don't need to call it an explosion because this is what this Husky team just kind of does when they're right on the offensive side of the ball. Is that enough to propel them into the top 4 of the college football playoff ranking? Because they did stay at number 5 in the AP poll.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of semantics still, because until another top 5 team or until an undefeated team loses, it's kind of like, okay, you're playing chess and or checkers or whatever the case may be. Because nothing really matters until somebody loses. And once you get to that point, which is really going to come probably this coming week or in the next couple of weeks, where, you know, Michigan and Ohio State play each other. There's a few other schools that are going to start playing other teams. Maybe even Georgia gets a loss
Michigan,
somewhere
Penn
in there.
State's coming up too, right?
I believe so. Yeah, I think actually Michigan and Penn State happens before Michigan and Ohio State. So the fact that, you know, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to lose. And I think that's where you're going to start to see more movement and more legitimate movement, because you could have Washington at 4 and Florida State at 5 right now. You could, because Florida State beat an okay Pitt team on the road 24-7. Washington goes 52-42 against USC and a terrible defense and gets the defensive coordinator fired. So which one looks better? Well, the College Football Playoff Committee could say, well, Washington didn't play defense and didn't have a great defensive game. And it's like, okay, but they did only give up 42 points, which, you know, Cal gave up 50, you know.
It's under USC's scoring average for the season. So, you know.
Right. So exactly. So there's ways in splitting it to where it's a positive, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, if it does come out the exact same status quo 5, but I mean, given how Georgia looked, how do they not fall maybe to 3 or 4? And maybe Michigan goes up to 1 because Ohio State didn't look that good, but nobody lost, right? So we're just talking about, did anybody move legitimately? Not necessarily, but I think Washington, I mean, you can make a case for Washington at number 4. I will, and I did. But, you know, it's a matter of, okay, if they're still at 5, Oregon will still be at 6. Nothing really changes.
I think that Bama's big win over LSU might I don't know how it's going to shake things up, but I think that's something that the CFP committee will consider. Just kind of moving forward, we'll kind of see how that all gets weighed when those rankings come out on Tuesday night. We might do another live reaction show, so stay tuned for that too. But one thing that I really did want to talk about from this game, and I know we're going to talk more about Dillon Johnson going forward, but is Michael Penix, because he really did look like himself again. Yeah, he didn't necessarily have the best numbers game of his career. I think it's really, really cool that him and Dillon Johnson actually ended up with the same amount of yards on the day, with Dillon Johnson's rushing yards and Penix's passing yards. But I think that he needs to be considered the Heisman favorite after this. And, you know, wherever you look, things might be a little bit different because Bo Nix had a big day. JJ McCarthy still seems to be at the front of a lot of people's minds. But I think that Michael Penix still needs to kind of be the Heisman favorite because the win over Oregon is up there. That's really big. And yeah, he struggled a little bit, especially against Stanford, or excuse me, not against Stanford, against Arizona State. He bounced back a little bit against Stanford, then had another good game, I would say, against USC, where he wasn't necessarily asked to do a whole ton because Dillon Johnson did literally whatever he wanted to on the ground. And I think that that's kind of, I know we'll talk about it more. Yes, I keep saying that, but that's just kind of what we've been waiting for from this Husky offense. We know Ryan Grubb wants to establish the run, wants to run the ball. And on a night like that, you don't need Michael Penix to do anything more than he did yesterday.
Right. Well, I think actually that was kind of the promising sign to where we'd been looking to see, hey, can Grubb and Penix make a change? And when I say make a change, it means take the checkdowns when they're there, not necessarily always try to go for the 20-yard shot play or 30-yard shot play. And they did that last night. A lot of stuff was checkdowns. A lot of stuff was underneath. You didn't really have that massive home run over the top play, but they didn't need to, because when Dillon's getting I think Dillon averaged 9.8 yards a carry at the end of the game.
Like
and so I think when you're running the ball so effectively, it's so uncharacteristic for Washington. We're like, okay, we don't have to throw the ball. We don't really have to. And a lot of the other passes were kind of, swing passes or short just to get the ball out in space. And it's like, that's all this offense has to do, especially when it's running the ball effectively. Now, when you're not running the ball effectively, then you want to take more shot plays, go for it. But the fact that Penix and Grubb didn't force it, they just took what came to them. Honestly, same thing with USC did. Neither offense really forced anything. Washington managed to have the better running game that night, even though it looked early on like USC actually, even without Marshawn Lloyd, was going to have a pretty good running day. But Washington managed to kind of get a few stops on defense and really just started. Once Dillon got into like the third quarter, it really just kind of seemed like he found a new gear. Like he found that fourth gear pretty quick. And it was one of those where like, okay, look, just run Dillon, get him his career day, don't cheapen it. And they even got Tyler Rogers in the mix as well. So it was a matter of, okay, we're running the ball effectively. Let's not try to pass the ball because we don't need to. And, I mean, ironically, we said before the game, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns or 350 and 4 touchdowns. Like, yeah, but he didn't need to. He had a Heisman moment, which was the touchdown to Devin Culp, a 22-yarder, perfect precision pass. But other than that, he didn't need to do anything else. And, obviously he had a couple good plays to Jalen Polk and things like that. So he was effective, right? And he was his usual self. I was a little concerned about the interception because he stared down Eric Gentry and still managed to get picked off. So
that's something that I've noticed. I'm sorry to cut you off because I've noticed something that's happened from time to time, and it's something that we discussed a little bit on the crossover that Mark Culkin and I did on Friday, where he said, doesn't he like have that tunnel vision at times? And I said, yeah. And one thing I've noticed is that it comes from, and I don't mean this in like a derogatory way, and from overconfidence, where he's seen that throw and made that throw so many times that linebacker's 6'7", where he just did a great job to get a hand on that ball, where I'm not overly concerned with that play, but I do get what you're saying. And I think that that's something that going forward won't happen again, because we don't see him make the same mistake more than once.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I was okay with who he was throwing it to, because I said Jack Westover anytime touchdown, and Jack Westover would have caught that for a touchdown had he looped it over Gentry's, fingertips. So it wasn't a bad throw, and obviously in the swing of the moment and where they are in the field. The problem is, I mean, yeah, you catch it in the end zone, so it's back at the 25. But either way, let's say they catch it, they picked it off at the 5-yard line. It's not the worst throw, right? It's not going to be a pick six, right? It's not. Yes, you don't want to lose possessions, but it's not the worst decision, right? So I think it's just a matter of making sure that Penix doesn't do that when he doesn't need to against a Michigan or a Georgia or when it truly matters in the playoffs.
No, I like that point a lot. And before we move on, because we're going to talk a lot more about Dillon Johnson, because his day just opened up so much for the offense and what they want to do moving forward. But before we do that, it's now time for your game changer of the week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. And much like Dillon Johnson, because of course we're going to talk about Dillon Johnson here, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. And they, like I said, they changed the game, just like Dillon Johnson, who had the single best day of his career and had a historic game in terms of just Husky running backs, rushing for 256 yards and 4 touchdowns. He really was incredible. And just like Athletic Brewing, which is also incredible because their brews are great tasting and award-winning and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. They brew over 50 styles of craft, non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, golden, sours, and more. They're fit for all time, so you can drink them anytime, anywhere, make any activity even more enjoyable, like watching a big game or your kid's game, tackling work, or working out, etc. It's basically anytime, really. That's just one of the things that they're great for, and you can find Athletic Brewing Co.'s non-alcoholic brews at a store near you, or you can buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout, 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about with Dillon Johnson was as our game changer of the week is he really did he had a historic game, but one of the biggest things that I think that this does going forward is it opens up a new lane for Washington's offense because Washington has struggled to run the ball this year at times. Like that's no secret. We've seen that. But now that the offense just kind of seems to be getting back into a rhythm and just seems to be they ran for over 300 yards last night. Like that they did that. Now the play action is open. And I think that's something we can see a lot more going forward. And now that defenses kind of have to respect the running game a little bit more, I feel like that's going to open up so much more downfield for Jalen Polk and Rome Odunze. Maybe Jalen McMillan comes back. We saw the shot play to Giles Jackson last night that was just about this close from turning into a touchdown. So it looks like things are really starting to open up in a way that we haven't really seen as much this year as we did last year for this Husky offense.
Yeah, and I mean, some people had said, hey, maybe Grubb isn't showing all their hands, and it's like, okay, well, this is the month of November, so it's time to show your whole hand. And whether it was Greenwich's defense, Washington's offense, a happy medium combination of both, that's what you need to start seeing more of. Open up the offense more. Tybo's now played in 7 games, so obviously that red shirt is well beyond Burns. So it's a matter of, okay, these are your guys moving forward. Mix them in more. Find a way to but also consistently do it, right? Not just, hey, we're giving Tybo 3 carries on this drive, and then he's not playing for another 6 or 7 series. It's like, okay, well, what's the point in that? Like, why are we doing this? So I think, and also to your point, the fact that you did that last night without Jalen McMillan, like just flat out, and Roman, no receiver had 100 yards. Crazy. Like, that's how good Dillon Johnson was running the ball. So you're not going to have that I love Dillon, but you're not going to have that every single game. But with that being said, you have
crazy if you did.
Oh man, here we go. But if you even have half of that every game, or even 3/4 of that every game, where okay, Dillon's going for 100, 110, 120 and a touchdown or 2. That's great. Because that's all this offense needs to keep the ball on the field and stay in rhythm and stay on time. Because that's what they haven't been able to do a lot this season is, okay, well, yeah, you have these great shot plays and these big plays with the passing game, but then you go 3 and out. And now Oregon's back in the game and like nothing. And so it's like, okay, how do you stay on the field and control the clock? You run the ball. And now everybody's known you can run with Washington, but they just haven't executed it for whatever reason. And so it was a get-right game against USC. But now we're going to see how much they're actually going to get right. Because you can do it against USC. Now try that against Utah. If you can run over Utah, now we're in business. If you can run over Oregon State, now we're really in business. And Washington State is kind of, just is what it is. But, with that being from a defensive run game perspective,
I wanted to say something about losing to Stanford, but I'm just gonna leave it at that when it comes to Wazoo. But one thing that I had to get that in there.
I know. I don't blame you.
But I think that one other thing when it comes to Dillon Johnson is this is not only is this the performance we've been waiting for from that standpoint, but we talked about the play action, right? How that opens things up because we saw what kind of defense can be played against this Husky team when the run game isn't necessarily respected. Because look at what happened against Arizona, right? Where there were so many defensive backs just playing so far off the ball because they were like, yeah, okay, yeah, we don't think you can run the ball on us. We don't think you can beat us that way. Now this game shows that, yeah, okay, maybe you can. And yes, you're right. Utah and Oregon State, especially running the ball, is going to be 2 very different stories in that regard. But even just that threat, knowing that that's something that has happened this year, I think that will be something that defensive coordinators are going to have to respect going forward.
Right. Well, not only that, but the other thing about Dillon, because he also had 2 catches for 11 yards. So I remember talking to him when he committed after transferring from Mississippi State. And one thing he said was, if we can't run the ball, Grubb showed me ways in which they can still get me the ball. And weirdly enough, they hadn't done that this season. Like we'd seen Dillon Johnson out in the flat, but Michael Penix wouldn't look to him or whatever reason they weren't taking any of those checkdowns. And then last night, out of nowhere, Will Nixon catches checkdowns. Dillon Johnson catches swing passes. There were
Tyler
guys.
Rogers had one.
Right, exactly, where they're getting the ball in space and you were also running the ball. So I don't know necessarily. I mean, I think part of last night was they owed Dillon a couple of games back. So I think, that was a way to get a decent amount of those yards and stats back to him. But I mean, moving forward in the month of November and into December, where it's like, okay, you brought Dillon in for a reason, and he can't do, aside from Cam Davis, who we all know is out for the season, nobody can do what Dillon does from a consistency, run, and pass perspective. And they just haven't gone to him as much this season for whatever reason. And so it's like, okay, if you're gonna have guys like that, and you're bringing guys in all the way from the Southeast, live up to what you're saying. And it's not that Grubb lied to him, right? I'm not saying Grubb lied to him, but it's almost like, hey, I know it's kind of hard to get out of that rhythm of passing, but you got a capable pass catcher, and also he can block. So it's a matter of, there's no reason why they haven't been able to, for whatever reason. Maybe they opened it up more against USC, and that was the result of it. So I think there's some truth in that, but again, it truly is kind of hard to say like, oh yes, Washington's run game is back, because they did it against USC. So it's like, it's good. Right. It's certainly capable. Now we see that it's capable. Can you replicate it next week for a better defensive coaching staff that is going to make some in-game adjustments?
But like you said earlier, it's not necessarily about replicating it, though. It's just about making it somewhat effective, right? Because obviously I don't know if that can be replicated. And it's especially against Utah, but in that same vein, it's just about knowing that threat is there. Because we know how this offense wants to beat you, right? And it was just kind of, because we've kind of been like thinking about this all year in terms of the run game of, all right, well, what are they going to do? What can they do here? And when is it really going to show up? And yeah, it shows up against USC, who was giving up 172 yards on the ground coming into the game. They'd give over 200 yards on the ground in 4 of their last 5 games before last night. So yeah, like you would hope that they can run the ball well, and they did. They ran it very well. And I just think that if they didn't run it last night, that would, and they didn't run it effectively last night, that would have been more of a problem, and would have been more of a sign than, oh, okay, well, yeah, they can do it now. And it goes back to just kind of, as we begin to wrap up this part of the show here, it just shows every single lane that is available now to Ryan Grubb down the stretch. Whereas we look at the Utah game, the Oregon State game, the Wazoo game, it just shows, oh, okay. And then even going forward to a potential Pac-12 championship game and a potential college football playoff game, if that is in the cards for this team, it just shows everybody on film, oh, wow, yeah, they ran it for 300 yards. Yeah, they did it against USC, but it's okay, yeah, we definitely need to commit those extra bodies instead of just rush 3, drop 8, see what happens. It's just, it opens up so many extra avenues for this offense, no matter who is playing running back. But Dillon Johnson does seem to just be the best option.
Right. I mean, certainly Dillon is the best running back in the room, but both in experience and just capability. But since we hadn't seen that, I think it's more about the consistency than anything else, right? Because I mean, Dillon's had a 100-yard game against Oregon, 91 against who is the next week? Because he had 91 the following week after that. But the point is, okay, you're not there at 100 yards yet, and he has actually never been a 100-yard back, because he's been that kind of complimentary back in a complimentary offense. He almost kind of
the ball either.
Right, but ironically enough, it almost kind of fell into that trap this season where it's like, hey, we'll run the ball with you, but we want to throw more. And it's like, okay, then why aren't you throwing more to Dillon? Because he's a very capable, and I think early in the season he was still kind of building back his health and building back to full strength, but certainly after Michigan State, he was good to go. So there was no reason why they shouldn't have tried to go to him more, but now when the season actually matters for the rest of the way out, this is when you can say, hey, you know what, we haven't been able to, but now we're going to try to even more. So I think that's probably where Grubb's head is at moving forward.
Right. And I feel like that's a good place to just kind of say, yeah, we've talked a lot about the offense today, because we definitely need to talk about the defense, which we will do. But first, we're going to send a quick hello to our friends over at LinkedIn, because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you should check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. That's probably what Alex Grinch is doing today, probably updating his resume on LinkedIn. I'm sorry, I had to get another one of those in there because it needed to be said, as Washington didn't necessarily help anything on his resume there, but hey, that's just kind of the reality. And this has been brewing for a while down at USC. Super easy. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile and spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs is rated #1 by small businesses in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Whew, all right. The defense, there are some concerns that we need to talk about, but there are also some positives that I think we should mention. Do you want to start negative and end on a happy note, or start positive and then just go downhill from there?
No, let's start negative and work our way to the positives. There weren't that many negatives, but there were enough negatives. I mean, I think, there's two sides of this coin, right? Because no matter what, USC is going to get your points. They're going to get their yards. So I think it wasn't an atrocious perspective. And also, I think, to me, the fact that they were actually able to get home a few times does make it significant. But I don't think it's anywhere near what Washington wants it to be. But I'm also not sure it has to be. I'm truly not sure. Because the only teams that should outscore USC right now on Washington's schedule is only one, and it's potentially Oregon in the Pac-12 championship.
Right.
I don't see. Yes, Utah destroyed Arizona State team. So it's at home, that I don't expect Utah to put up 40, 55 or even 40 plus. They might get to 30, but might get 20, between 20 and 40, but I don't think they're going to get anywhere near above 40. Oregon State kind of in the same vein, where they'll probably get to between 28 and 38, but they might get to 40, but I don't necessarily think they will. I'm not necessarily too concerned with the defense moving forward because we saw more pressure, and I think that's kind of where the problem alleviates stuff. Now, yeah, Elijah Jackson had a couple of rough times out there. Jabbar Muhammad, to your point, never really got targeted or really tested, but it's always been Thaddeus and Elijah that the other two that kind of get tested and beaten up. So maybe, it's a matter of depth, but that's not going to change at this point in the season. I mean, it's you're not going to go out and sign, player X from the SEC for 4 games. You want to go sign
Josh Norman?
Right. Exactly. It's like, hey, we're going to add 3 or 4 guys off the NIL
squad.
Right. Exactly. Off the NIL waiver practice squad. So it's like that doesn't necessarily work in the college game. And even if you were to put in a Javion Green, if you were to put in any of the young freshmen, nothing is going to drastically change. So I think it's better to have these guys just take their licks as a full season and then see where they go in the off season and kind of how things progress from there, because I truly don't see much changing from that perspective.
No, you're right. And I think that because you mentioned the depth, I think one positive that we didn't really get to note on our live recap last night is 2 safeties did return yesterday. Cameron Fabiculanan came back, and Vince Nunley was also back, even though Kalen DeBoer said earlier in the week that he was probably not going to be available. So that's interesting from that perspective. We'll hear more about that, on the Tuesday show, since we record this on Sunday afternoon. But I think that's a positive. But you're right. And I think one of the things that the secondary did, that we got a good question about it last night while we were recording the live show, which is my second plug to make sure you go back and listen to that one too, is that somebody asked us, is it execution? Is it scheme? Is it both? And that's kind of where I think it's, the scheme kind of comes into question a little bit at times, where USC's receivers are allowed to eat up so much space before they even get contacted by a defensive back sometimes. And I feel like that showed up a lot last night. And there were some questionable calls that, I saw, and I pointed them out on Twitter, but those aren't excuses, right? You can't just say, they lost because of this questionable call. The Arizona State game. Sorry, had to I'd throw that in there for all the Duck fans that say that's the only reason Washington's still undefeated. But I think that one thing that does need to be noted when it comes to the scheme, especially, is that William Inge and Chuck Morrell talked a lot about this aggressive attacking style defense. And you don't see that in the secondary. Because one thing that I love, you talked about Thaddeus Dixon. I really do believe in him moving forward. I think that he could, going forward, be a big piece of this defense. One of the things that I really like about his film and the things that he does is that he is that in-your-face attacking, I'm going to press up on you, play press man, and you are never going to get a clean release off me kind of guy. We saw that time and time again yesterday, where they said, all right, yeah, you're going to play 6, 7, 8 yards off the ball. And then, oh, okay, I'm just going to sit down right here, catch it, and then make you make a tackle, where he made some good tackles. But it's that same thing of that's not why he's here. That's not why you brought him into the scheme, because you want him to play a different style. And it's just, it feels like they're going away from that in the secondary. And is it because they're threatened by deep speed? Maybe. Like, we don't necessarily have the answer to that at this time. We might have it later in the week, but that's something that was very confusing. And I know I gave a shout out to our buddy Ben Glassmeyer, who was the one that I was talking about this with at the time. And it's really confusing when you see, oh yeah, they like these aggressive, like, island style corners. Jabbar Muhammad, when he and I spoke a couple times, one of the things he said in the spring was like, yeah, they brought me here to kind of be that guy to put out on an island sometimes and just lock somebody down. And he's done that at times. He's done really, really well with that. But there are other times where that's just not what they're asked to do. And that's where I'm confused with the scheme.
Well, and I mean, but to your point about Jabbar, he's their best defensive back, no matter position, bar none, end of story, and full stop. So last night on the first couple of drives, when Jabbar's at safety and Jabbar's the nickel, and then Jabbar's like just moving around and kind of just being whatever Jabbar wants to do, it's almost like, well, I think he's the defensive backs coach at this point, maybe the cornerbacks coach at this point. So, I said it after Michigan State. I said it then, and my position has not changed. I have not continued to harp on it, but my position has not changed. And
I'm not disagreeing with you.
And I think that's kind of where the team is at, is where you're not in the situation of USC, so you don't have to do that. But I think at the same point, there's going to be changes, maybe both scheme and personnel and staff, that allow next season to say, hey, this is what it was supposed to look like last year. We just didn't have necessarily all the pieces going like this to make that work.
No, I like that. And I like what you said about Jabbar, but I kind of want to add to that, where I feel like the depth might come into play a little bit there, because we saw him line up for there. We've seen Mish Powell line up at safety, like kind of over the course of fall camp. We saw those things happen. And I think that it gives a different look to the quarterback, which was interesting, because when you saw that, you were kind of like, ooh, what's coming here? Because it just allows for so many other possibilities in coverage, especially with Jabbar's ball skills and just kind of the way he likes to play. And it'll confuse a quarterback where it's, oh, wait, that's their best corner. Why is he lined up over here? Why is he lined up over there? What's his idea? What's going to happen on this play now? Where that, I don't hate that. I think there's a lot that can come of that. And especially when, Asa Turner's not back there. Maybe he's the guy that's like getting people aligned, doing all these different things. But I think that's really helpful from just a mix up the looks kind of thing, where you can confuse an opposing quarterback that way. But the other positive that I wanted to say, and somebody pointed this out on Twitter, I think it was our buddy Acropolis who said it. And he said, if that was any quarterback that's not named Caleb Williams, Washington has 7 or 8 sacks last night. Is that an issue with tackling? Yes. But is that also the pass rush looks really good. And, against whoever's going to end up playing quarterback for Utah this week, and then DJ Uiagalelei at Oregon State too, even though that's fantastic offensive line that they have down there. That's just a good sign going forward for the rest of the season, where it's okay. Yeah, the pressure is starting to get there, because they still had 4 sacks of Caleb Williams last night. So there's still a lot to just kind of say, yeah, the building blocks are there and the pressure is there. So maybe there's going to be some things that we see come together over the final month of the season. You got an interesting face on there. Is there a stat you want to throw out?
Well, I just thought his Dixon was the highest graded UW defender last night, so I don't know how to take that, but neither here nor there.
There were some interesting grades coming out from last night.
I was gonna. That's why my face was kind of perplexed. But I think to your point, I mean, again, I said one of my bold predictions was 3+ sacks.
Yep.
3+ sacks happened. I think you had a forced fumble. You said they will get their first fumble.
I think I did have that one. Yes, that one.
So and Zion gets right. Zion deserves all the love and praise and support for everything that he did. And I think, honestly, that's where I want to end this, because Zion did not have to play last night. Didn't have to practice last week. Could have gone back to Hawaii to be with his family, and nobody would have questioned it, right? Nobody would have been like, "Wow, you're quitting on your team." It's like, my father died. Like, I'm like, but what do you want me to do here? Like, so the fact that he matured, and he's matured for a long time, but he's been that guy. But then early in the game where he jumps off sides, and you almost saw me, like he clapped, he like stopped, he was like, oh, but then went back to go. Like, okay, oh my god, it's like, and then finally to get the strip, it wasn't a sack, but to force the fumble,
that's a strip sack. Yeah, that does qualify as a sack.
Right, but it not exact. It doesn't look like a traditional sack, but you're right. It is
true.
It's a sack, and he gets it from what he should have had against Michigan State. And then the emotional exhale after the game. It's kind of like, hey, you know what? Everything was right. It's a terrible situation, but your dad is always going to be with you. It was a great moment for him to have with DeBoer on the field. I don't necessarily know how I feel about the ESPN camera being right there capturing all that, just because it just seems a little bit much for me, especially also panning to Caleb Williams too. And just all that seemed a little bit extra to me. Yeah. I'm okay with it for a couple of seconds. Like, hey, he's embracing his coach. And now we go cut to somewhere else to people. And you can still talk about it. You can still, wow, like, because Kirk Herbstreit mentioned, this is genuine. This is why his players love him. We go back to last season.
That's why we talk about him so much. That's why we because that's
you go to Wayne Talapapa last season. Right. And when Wayne Talapapa last season after the UVA situation, all of that. And so it's like, okay, this is exactly what you want to say, but I don't necessarily need to see it. Like, I think because it's a personal moment. Things like, especially when it's an emotional thing like that. Now, when, I, for full transparency, filmed the team shaking hands with Taj Davis after the Cal game, but that's a former player who transferred. Nothing negative about that. It's just, hey, cool, hey, good to see you, buddy, all that stuff. That's a different type of the culture, but it's all a part of the culture, and I think that's what makes it significant.
I think when it happens on the field, it does become a somewhat nuanced discussion of, there are cameras everywhere. Something like this is bound to happen. So but I do understand your point, and I don't disagree with that at all. And I feel like that is a good place to send us off here today, because we want to send all our love to ZTF's family. It's just a heartbreaking situation to go through. And to all the everydayers out there, thank you so much for joining us. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate all your support. That live stream last night was awesome. We really can't wait to do another one after just the way that you guys showed out in force at that. That was really, really cool. Thank you so much. And if this is your first time here, hey, welcome. I'm going to make sure I hit the right button, just unlike last night on the live stream. So if you're new to the channel, hey, thank you so much for showing up. Please feel free to subscribe. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. We really do appreciate your support. Like the video. Leave us a 5-star review. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Tuesday.